So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on when you may be watching this. I'm Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection, where my goal with these videos is try to help graduate students do more than just survive. I want to see you thrive. So, the last couple of weeks, one of the things I've been doing is focusing on communication scripts. As I've talked about before, scripts, in my opinion, kind of give you a baseline to work from, particularly in difficult conversations, but you can also use them in general situations. But usually, you have to be attentive to using the script. And so, as we've talked about, one of the hard things is first just changing your behavior so that you actually use the scripts, and then being patient to grow into them, I guess, in my opinion. That's another piece of it. So, this week, what I want to talk about is how do you invite dialogue, or how do you invite a response? And so, this came, I don't know where I've picked up. I actually put these together and I posted them on my board here at work and tried to figure out where I got them from. I think I've picked them up just listening to various speakers talk. And this is particularly useful, I think, when you're teaching or when you're lecturing or you're doing some kind of presentation and you want to get a response. I mean, one of the things when we're presenting, obviously, it's a lot better if we're basically do kind of an active type of approach to the presentation. In learning, we call it active learning. As opposed to more of a passivity or passive type of approach to it, where you just keep talking, and you hope the person is actually hearing and engaging and remembering. One of the things that seems very apparent, or is very apparent in the literature, is that people, essentially when people come to a conclusion themselves, it basically helps them remember much more. And that's really last week when we were talking about the coaching habit from Michael Bungay Stanier. The very last question about what was most useful to you in this conversation does exactly that. It causes the person to kind of string together or tie together their thoughts relative to the conversation and what they walk away with. Well, this has the same basically does the same thing. And so one of the things that I try to purposely do is, in lectures that I do and presentations that I do, I purposely try to use these various questions to spur or invite a response, or to try to create a dialogue. And as a speaker, as a presenter, it's kind of hard to do because you have to kind of be willing to take a risk, and you have to create a pregnant pause, right? After you throw this question out, you can't do what a lot of us like to do, is like all of a sudden start talking again. You have to let people in the audience, or people that you're trying to get the response from, let them collect their thoughts and give them a moment of silence, and don't be the first to speak. Just stop and force them to say something. In a classroom type of setting, oftentimes we'll call on somebody. As a last resort, I suppose that's okay, but my preference would be just to throw out a question and get the response. So here's a couple things, a couple ways that you can do that. And these are questions that I've actually written down. So first would be, you're talking through content. And actually, when I'm doing like PowerPoint presentations or any kind of presentation content, I try to do, let's say 10 minutes, 15 minutes at max amount of talking, and then just stop and invite a response. And so I might say something like this. I might be talking, then I say, well, what's the most important, over the last 10 minutes, what's the most important thing you're hearing me say? And just toss that question out and just sit in silence. And it's as a presenter, it's uncomfortable to throw out a question like that and just wait. Because as a speaker, a lot of times we feel like we have to be filling up the space with talking. And the problem is if you keep talking and talking, if you ask the question, then you just, what do I say, steamroller right over it. Essentially, folks won't engage. And so one question that you could ask is, what are you hearing me say? To me, that's a really good question to ask. And again, I try to do that. Another way to do it is like if you were in a small group meeting, you can say, well, how does that sound to you? Right? And this works better when you're more on a one-on-one or a smaller group scenario, as opposed to, what are you hearing me say works in a larger group, let's say, in a classroom setting of 25, 30 or whatever. But how does that sound to you is more of an idea relative to, like if you were in a group scenario. Another kind of general question, another way to kind of ask the first question is, what are you understanding from this? Or what are you taking away from this? Or, what are you hearing, right? So it's those all kind of go together. Another that can come off a little bit awkwardly, like depending on how you phrase it. So you have to be careful with this one. But what are you thinking? What do you think about this? What's on your mind? What are you pondering relative to whatever we're talking about, right? So it's another way to invite dialogue. Another one is not just to engage thoughts, but also to engage feelings, right? So you could say, well, how are you feeling about that? Now, a lot of times when we ask that question, some people will really talk about the affective aspect or affective dimension, but oftentimes they may really start talking about what they're thinking, but also what are you feeling about that? And then lastly, more of kind of an empathetic statement would be more of like, well, what does that feel like? When you're talking and when you're in conversation. So these questions I've kind of pulled, and I'm pretty sure that last one probably comes from Brene Brown. But you'll hear, and I know some of this is from like probably the warrior thing that I was involved with, Garrett J. White and all that. He oftentimes says, well, what are you hearing me say? He oftentimes says that one. Brene says more of what does that feel like? But I think I've cobbled together this list probably from multiple places. I don't think it's from one thing, but essentially the idea is to try to invite dialogue, right? When you're conversing with people, whether that be one-on-one, whether that be one to a small group or medium group or one to a large group, having different tactics, different script statements that you can use to invite dialogue. Because again, as a speaker, it's very tempting for us to just go in and command the stage and just keep talking, talking, talking. Particularly for a university professor like myself, I'm used to going in and basically just blasting people with content. I mean, that's kind of historically what a lecture environment looks like, as opposed to taking more of an active listening or active participation from the standpoint of active learning or that kind of thing. And so the more you can intersperse that, to me, one of the things by adding these questions to any presentation, to me, what it does is it kind of shows a mark of maturity, I think, in presenting, because it does take some courage to use these questions and to stop and just be silent. It's really hard to do that when you're in front of people because you almost feel like you have to be the entertainer, the person, the sage on the stage, as they sometimes call it. So it does, to me, it does show a mark of maturity in presentations when you purposely plan this, when you purposely plan points at which you invite dialogue, you invite feedback, you invite people to participate, rather than just spewing content at them. So I know this week's content is a little bit short. Now next week, I was going to move on from this, but I stumbled across yet another set of scripts that are more, this set of scripts is more personal. And I kind of got it from, again, I keep referencing Tom Henschel and his podcast, The Look and Sound of Leadership. But I think it was this month. This month he actually talked, I think it was this month. This month, there was a piece in there that kind of jives with what we're talking about relative to scripts. It's more of a personal kind of thing. And essentially what it focuses on is how to not get emotionally hijacked. And I'll talk about that probably next week. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Again, I think scripts are incredibly important, and particularly as you are able to figure out how to integrate them into your life and integrate them into your conversations and into your communications, I think it can make a big difference. Again, if you're a graduate student, or even if you're not, if you're finding these things useful, again, I would encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe or connect on LinkedIn to me, connect on Facebook to me. You can also, if you're a graduate student particularly, get involved with the Grad Connection private Facebook group. And essentially it's not meant to be overly cumbersome, but it's generally I try once a week to not only post these videos there, but also to try to encourage folks and actually try to get folks to connect with one another. So all of those avenues are ways to connect. I know last week I said something about I was going to post like separate videos to YouTube and LinkedIn and all that. I ended up just throwing it on YouTube because there were some limits as far as file size, and I don't like being limited. Even though this one is less than 10 minutes, LinkedIn kind of limits you to 10 minutes. So for now, I'm just going to keep throwing them out on YouTube. Hopefully you're finding them useful. Based on what I'm seeing on LinkedIn, it looks like, we're getting about 500 or so people a week looking at this. And then it grows from there, and that's great. Hopefully you're finding the content useful. If you got any questions for me or want to interact with me, whether you're at Purdue or not, always up for engagement in that way. But nevertheless, as we begin, at least academically speaking, this is graduation weekend, and so a lot of people are closing that chapter of their life. And one of the things I posted this week is I would encourage you, if you're graduating this weekend, or if you know someone who's graduating, take the time just to stop and pause and enjoy and celebrate. With family and friends. I think a lot of times we oftentimes kind of rush through the celebration, and it's like, okay, what's next, rather than stopping and just pausing, and just kind of savoring the relationship, savoring experiences. And honestly, I think when you look back, when you 10 years, 20 years, whatever down the road, it's actually going to be the experiences with friends and family that's going to stick out to you, not necessarily, whatever the next task is. So with that, let me wish you a great Friday. I hope you have a great weekend. And with that, see you.